I know by now most people are familiar with what the People's Progressive Party, the government, and the president have spoken about this tragedy. They're also aware of the expressions of condolences for this devastating loss of innocent lives that we have suffered as a country. There are several things that the president has announced that hopefully will assist us and those families to get through this very difficult period. But today I want to once again, although we had done so as a party, to express our heartfelt condolences to the families who lost their loved ones in the fire at Madia. And also our full support and prayers for those who have been hospitalized and those children who had to endure this terrible tragedy, ordeal. We know that this devastating loss has taken away the joy from so many families. And I want them to know that they can count on our unconditional support now and in the future. Since this has happened, a profound sadness has fallen on our country. And it's almost palpable. Anywhere you go, you feel it. And it's going to be a long period before we can overcome this, because the loss of a single young life is a tragedy, much less the loss of so many of our young people with their hopes and aspirations and their parents' dreams about them. And I just cannot imagine how those parents are feeling and their families are feeling at this point in time. We have seen the expression of their grief in a very visible manner, and we can only sympathize with that expression because they're the ones who are suffering at this time. And I want to, as the president said, repeat that there's a time and place for everything. And to urge those who have been so disrespectful as to politicize or try to politicize this national tragedy, to capitalize on people's grief is unconscionable. And any attempt to do so should be condemned by the entire public. We've seen it happen in sometimes veiled forms, and then in other cases in almost a flagrant, open manner. And in whatever their manifestations, whether it's by insinuation or by just openly trying to politicize people's grief, we must condemn this. I saw the first statement from the leader of the opposition, which was a measured statement. And I applauded him for that. And then before I knew it, he was on television in Trinidad and Tobago, a TV station in Trinidad and Tobago, politicizing the issue. Today, he has canceled his press conference to go to Madia and attempting once again to politicize the issue. And we've seen some vile statements from some of his party members. But we will overcome this. And the parents and all of the families know because they've been told this, that the government will stand by their side. And as I said, there is a time and place for everything, and we'll have all the answers in the future. So this year, our independence celebrations are very subdued across the country. They have to reflect the circumstances of the country at this time. The mourning of many people and the profound grief that exists in so many quarters. But we must never forget the lessons of our independence struggle. That we had to walk a very difficult road, and we overcame many odds and obstacles on the path to freedom. And today we are a free country, largely because of the sacrifices and the struggles of many, many people, many of our ancestors. They fought against slavery, they fought against indentureship, they fought British colonial rule, and they brought our country to a state where we became free people and independent, and where there was dignity in being Guyanese and not being second-class citizens in our own countries. So we must never forget that struggle and all that they endured in that period. And so as we celebrate this independence, given the tragedy that has befallen the country, we must maybe shun the pomp and the ceremony, but still have, in our own personal way, maybe quiet reflections. And one thing that I'm sure, if we were to do that, that will be on every single person's mind, maybe some in a more evident manner than others, but that we have to, if we're going to live up to the expectations of our ancestors, but also more so, if we're going to accomplish our dreams, we have to remain a free country. And freedom, yes, we won it from colonial rule, but freedom could also be snatched away by our own people. By our own people. We saw a blatant attempt to do that in the period in the 2020 elections. And personally, if I had to do the reflections, those reflections, I saw with my own eyes the soldiers coming at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, chasing everyone out the polling places, taking away the ballot boxes from the polling places, in my village, even as a boy, and then they disappeared. Kicking out the polling agents who are supposed to follow the boxes, threw them out the vehicle, took away the ballot boxes with guns. And then my village, the village that predominantly voted for the People's Progressive Party, when the results were announced, 98% of the votes were declared in favor of the PNC. And I saw in that period people crying out of frustration, because for them, the little slip of paper that they had, that they marked an X on, meant more to them than just a piece of paper. It gave them self-respect to live in a free country, to know that their voices mattered. And that was taken away from them for a long period, almost 3 decades. And then we won that right back. And so people have to zealously guard that right. And what better day in our lives to think about that issue than Independence Day. And we saw it manifesting itself again in 2020, when one person chose to declare a result that didn't match that of the electorate. And one single person, the chief elections officer, invalidated 175,000 votes under some notion that they're not valid after people had gone and voted. So the threat is real, and it's very near to us. And therefore, every Guyanese, regardless of how you vote, you have to first of all cherish your vote. It matters because we fought a huge battle, not just for independence, but to have those that right and the vote counted, and they must commit to exercising the vote and doing so in a responsible manner. So today, for me personally, that is something I think about. And especially now too, when our people are moving, we have been plagued by attempts to divide our people along racial and religious and other lines. And when our people are trying to forge a unity that existed in the 50s, in the early 50s, when we were struggling for independence, a unity that was based more on a common struggle, that we still see people who actively divided through rumors and lies, and who are continuing to do that. And not only doing that, harassing people for exercising freedom of choice. And that has no place in a free society. And so people on this Independence Day too, they should commit that we will banish that sort of behavior from our country, and we'll all commit to fighting racism in all of its manifestations, and those who have benefited from its propagation, because they kept people in silos and ethnic enclaves with a particular voting pattern. We where we live, we must always ensure that there is a free media in our country. But a free media, as I said before, doesn't mean that a media that could pull down the entire country and try to do the same things that we believe are reprehensible to the forging of a common nation, which is dividing our people through innuendos and racism. And you do have some media persons who have no right in calling themselves journalists, whose sole tasks are to do that, to divide our people rather than bring them together. But we must always defend the free media. So these are some of the things that we have to think about and talk about. I'm hoping that over the next couple of days, or especially today and tomorrow, that we, in our little circles on social media, these are some of the things we debate. And to look at how far we have come, the road we have traveled, particularly young people, because I'm sometimes amazed that because of they want to forge and they're more interested in forging a common society. They're not burdened so much by the past. They act in a manner that they don't see sometimes the danger of what we have gone through in the past. And so I want to urge all the young people who are watching here on social media to say, go back, read about our history, see how there have been deliberate attempts to divide us. Look at the road we travel, both political and economic road you travel. And then you will understand sometimes that why at the political level or in our economic policy making that we avoid certain things and we take certain positions because they would have a context for you. So these are some of the things I wanted people to think about as we celebrate independence this year. Now, I've seen the latest news about the EU mission, and we have had an excellent, as the head of the EU mission said, that it was a very, very positive and open discussion that they had here with the round table and then in the meetings with various individuals. So I too met the EU mission, and we had some frank discussions. The EU played an important role in trying to stave off the attempt to steal our elections in 2020. They made some recommendations at that time. And as they pointed out, they commended the government for implementing a couple of recommendations, particularly as they relate to the statements of poll and the declaration in the new amendments, particularly in the Representation of the People Act. So I had to point out that there were numerous, in fact, countless other gaps that were not part of their recommendation that we plugged in the Representation of the People's Act. So although they didn't recommend them, they only recommended that we deal mainly with the declaration and how we treated statements of poll. But there are several other things that we thought that Lowenfield abused to create uncertainties in the electoral process. And we were determined to fix those. So one was the polling places and the establishment of polling places were at his discretion, both the location and the numbers. Now, in law, in the new act, we have fixed that the polling places have to be located within a certain proximity, and there is a number to assign to a polling place. So if you have more than 400 persons, then you can't have a single polling place. So we've removed that. You would recall that on the East Coast, in a major area like Fowles, thousands of voters, there was no polling place in the recommendation. They had to go all the way into the next village, Paradise, to vote. That is what Lowenfield and the others were putting, that the people from Fowles had to go to Paradise to vote. And we fought that off and until the night before the elections. Only then it was resolved, because we knew people were not going to go and vote if they had to go far away, especially when there were threats. So now that issue is out of the discretion of the chief elections officer and enshrined in the new law. I had to explain this too, and our team explained this to them. So not just the two things that they were commending us for doing in the act, which is publishing the statements of poll, but we said immediately after the elections, we're going to have the SOPs published before we start the count. And two, we're going to have a dedicated process. Clear the way, make clear the process through which the declarations have to be done. So you will never have a Mingo again flashing a duplicate or a photocopy version of a SOP on a bed sheet like he did in GCOM building, and without the polling agents being able to examine the SOPs. That was fixed. So something else that we fixed that were of a fundamental nature was the manual. Now the manual sets out the roles of the returning officer, the polling agent, and a whole range of other things, how the elections would be conducted. So by law now, the manual has to be developed before the elections, published in the newspapers, and shared with all of the political parties. And what this will do, this will prevent a situation like we had on the East Coast. You would recall that the presiding officers were told what documents should go in the box and what should be returned to GCOM. On the East Coast, Mingo changed that and told some of the presiding officers, bring the documents, don't put them in the box, bring them and give them to him. When the recount took place, APNO asked, why aren't those documents in the box? Because Mingo had changed the instruction to the presiding officers. Now, in the manual, it will identify all of the documents that have to be in the box. This will be published 3 months or so before the elections, so there would be no doubt as to what has to go into the box and what has to be returned to the RO. So those sorts of things, you remove the discretion. I can give hundreds of examples. So there are about 50 things that could be abused that we plug in the representation of the People's Act. So they commended the government on only 2, but we implementing the 2 they had recommended, but we had gone much further than that in doing so. On the issue of campaign finance, if you go to our manifesto, you will see we're probably the only party that said that. So we said long before the EU made a recommendation about that in our manifesto. But we have a reality to deal with here. First of all, they said, the EU, and I don't agree. There is this Waves article which quoted the EU Observer report. The EU Observation Mission notes that the 2020 general and regional elections campaign demonstrated that the 2 key contestants have significant funds at their disposal, while no other party has the capacity to run a nationwide campaign, and that the legal framework does not provide for transparency and accountability. Our job, the other parties, the small parties, couldn't even muster, some of them, 2,000 votes. How could you compare campaign finance with the major parties that have 200,000 supporters? It's natural that they will run bigger campaigns. So not for that reason. Our job in government as political parties is not to ensure that every single party has equal financing. You have to raise financing on the basis of your policy making and whether people find you attractive or not. But we do share the concern that big money could alter the results of elections. And that is why we committed to exploring campaign financing reform in this period, and we put that in our manifesto. But we also have another reality, that once people's names go on a register, next thing, and we raised this with the EU, you know the behavior of APNU. From the moment a person says, I've given $100 to the PPP and their name, because there will be a public register of every person who donates, APNU will turn up in front of their business and say, boycott the business. Boycott their operations. So that is something that we have to pay attention to. But we're committed to ensuring that big money, especially oil resources, that they do not influence elections here in Guyana. And this is precisely why we put that in our manifesto. I don't think any other party has that. And that preceded the EU recommendations. So we're looking at it, but it will be done in a manner that is respectful of all of those concerns that we met here. Not to provide the small parties with the equal funds as big parties. That's a different matter. Our job is not to, as a political party, as General Secretary of this party, my job is to grow the attractiveness of the PPP, make it more attractive and bigger. My job is not to look out for the small party. They have to go and make their own way. Of course, the framework and transparency has to be the same for everyone, but not I can do their job for them. So, and then these were basically some of the issues that came up. Now, I did have cause to mention about the report, because the convention that they wanted us to adopt, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the country has ratified this since 2008. So it's not a new convention. We've ratified that since 2008, but they're talking about the part of it that deals with campaign finance reform. But we have adopted that, the UN Convention Against Corruption, since 2008. So I also had cause, we spoke extensively, it was a great meeting, about the same issues about nuanced approaches. I pointed out to the EU mission about how, when you sign on to the international conventions, some of these international conventions, how they could be manipulated against small countries. And I used the example of the TIGI report again. I used it, and I've been using several examples of how local civil society get captured politically. And the EU recognized that civil society here is heavily politicized. So I pointed out about the support that civil society organizations got from the government since we got into office. Those dealing with the disabled or children, or the Salvation Army that deals with drug rehab, etc. And I pointed out about the partisan nature of some civil society members when and how they can influence global rankings or report. And this morning again, we had a discussion with the OAS Secretary General, and we pointed this out again because there are several conventions in the OAS to deal with all sorts of things, corruption, racism, etc. And I pointed out something that I've said here, right here, because I'm very transparent. I tell you what I say because I've said it here. I don't, and I will maintain that position. So I pointed out that APNU doesn't find resonance in Guyana for its divisive politics any longer. We can't push the race message with the same potency as it did before. So it is seeking out all of these organizations and conventions that we've signed on to basically hope that suddenly you see them popping up overseas, hoping that we'll get adverse reports that then they can then quote, although they influence the report, quote here to make it seem as though, yes, their arguments have merit. So we pointed out that any one of these conventions must not be the convention on which, in the first instance, people can go to. They must utilize, because if these conventions operate in that manner, they're undermining national institutions that are designed to deal with these matters. So the Ombudsman Office can deal with discrimination. The ERC is the constitutional body with more sanctions than an OAS or a UN can have ever on a country. They have powers of sanction, even prohibition of a party to contest elections. So that when APNU and the others go and make these outrageous claims abroad, they must be told, or the conventions must say, you have to exhaust national means before you come to us. It must be as last resort. because they're not interested in the matters being solved. Because if they're investigated here, you would see that 99% of them lack merit. They want to use these matters for public relation purposes. So we had some frank discussions with the international community on these matters, because we're not just going to expose APNU here. Wherever they've been going and carry their divisive message, we're going to go out there in a robust fashion to expose their game, because they've played this game too long. I think they've overplayed it now, and in this era, it's not going to happen. So we're very pleased with the EU mission, and it went beyond all of the discussions, because the press conference, I think, took place before my engagement with them, but we've gone much further than any recommendations from any international organization here. On the question of the voters list, I saw they said, a consensus, but that is also not taking a position. They should have made it said clearly that our laws do not allow, the Constitution of Guyana does not allow what APNU wants. It will be illegal, as the Chief Justice has said before. The EU should have been brave enough to say that, rather than kick it down the road and say, oh, the politicians must find a consensus on this. They want to remove people's names from the voters list. They cannot remove those names, because the Constitution prohibits this. The EU report in itself, and all the reports, spoke about the robust procedures at the polling places to prevent people from voting who should not be voting. And that is why of the 660,000 on the voters list, only about 460,000 voted, because those who are abroad or shouldn't have voted, they did not vote. And so that's very clear, and they should have made that clear after having looked at the law. So that is it. On biometrics, we had argued for biometrics, but biometrics not to prevent people from voting, because we already had a case, as I mentioned last week, the Esther Pereira case, where biometrics was used, and it was ruled as unconstitutional, and the PPP lost 2 years of its term because Claudette Singh ruled against us. We had to have early elections in the year 2001. So we couldn't serve our full term out, because APNU, we got together and used the ID card for people to vote. So our support for biometrics was people already have their fingerprints there. So there should be in the polling place maybe something when you go in, you put your fingerprint before you get the ballot, and it verifies that. Now, if you can't verify that the fingerprint is your fingerprint because it might be smudged, you go to a secondary where suddenly all the polling agents would recognize you didn't pass the fingerprint biometric test. And therefore, you go to an area where they would all examine whether you really are the person or not. So enhanced scrutiny. Then you go to vote, and you vote on an electronic machine, but you get a receipt, a paper receipt as to how you voted. You then look at it to see it's accurate, how you voted, and you put that in the box. So the box is controlled. So you have two systems, the machine and the box. If anything goes wrong with the machine, you always have the box to go back to, like the old method. So that is what can help enormously at the polling places. That is what we've advocated for. So they often are very misleading when they take little snippets. Oh, Jagdeo called for biometrics in the past or something like that. They splice things together. And then you have a different impression that somehow we're retreating from what we call for. But we recognize you can't use biometrics to prevent a person voting, because that had been ruled on by the courts already when we used the ID card in 2000. In 2001, I think the decision was made. So all of that was explained again about these issues to the EU delegation. On the oil and gas sector, a lot has been said, and in the past week, and so I'm just going to randomly deal with a few things, because I've seen that a number of people have been saying, I think one person said, Exxon must tell Guyanese why gas to energy is being pursued if there is no excess gas. So apparently the president of the local group said that there was no excess gas. And then APNU came out and said, we're going to lose tens of billions of dollars on this project because there's no gas. So effectively, we're building this pipeline. And you don't have any gas to use because Exxon said there is no gas. So why are you building the project? You'd lose tens of billions of dollars. So clearly, people by now, it's common sense that you would think that the PPP would build a facility like that, make promises to reduce electricity prices by 50%, supply cooking gas to the country, bring stability to the grid, start expanding new industries, and wouldn't have any gas to do it, and do that before the 2025 elections? We gotta be extremely stupid to do that. We'd lose the elections. So I don't know how anyone could come up with those conclusions. Now clearly, there is a context to it. There always is a context. So every time, we have a no flaring policy in our environmental permit. You can only flare if in the commissioning period, or if allowed by the EPA, which doesn't allow it. Only it sets out the period, the commissioning period. No flaring policy. So if you have gas now that you're not utilizing, you have to flare it. So it's either you utilizing the gas, you have a method of disposal, or you have to burn it. One of the two. You either dispose of it. So when they said no excess gas, it means that we don't have any flaring now. So all the gas that is being produced is being utilized back. So that is why they didn't need a feasibility study for that. Now clearly, that is explaining the position. There's no excess gas. That's why we're not flaring. We use all of it back. Now that's very different than looking at the 16 trillion cubic feet of associated gas that is already discovered and available. And working with the government of Ghana, we believe that the gas should be monetized, and we don't believe it should be re-injected, utilized in that manner. So that is where our gas strategy now is heading. We've said to Exxon, you have to make, from the gas you're reinjecting now, you have to make 50 million cubic per day available to the pipeline in the first instance, and they have agreed to do that. And then the pipeline is built for another maybe 120, 130 million cubic per day. It's a 12 inches pipeline. They would have to eventually get the gas that is being reinjected to supply the full potential of the pipeline. So there are two different things totally. Now the study we are doing our gas strategy, I told you already that as soon as we get past the bid round and the passage of the legislation and the PSA, we turn our full attention to the gas strategy. They're doing a study on monetizing gas separately. But our belief is that they argue that the quality of the reservoir, the gas, the oil reservoir and production is vastly enhanced by reinjecting gas. You've had technical people with a different opinion, and so we believe that they could, we've asked, since when, I don't know if you recall that I said this when I was in opposition. If you go back to opposition, the first time I met Exxon, they came to the leader of the opposition office for a briefing session. It was around maybe 2018 or so. And I asked them, what is the incremental value that you will get from re-injecting the gas? How much more oil can you produce over the life of the well versus taking the same amount of gas, bringing it onshore, or maybe through a floating LNG operation, monetizing it? Have you examined which would yield greater benefits to the company and the country? And I asked that question publicly, whether the government was doing that. And that is what we're engaged in. We want to maximize the use. So assuming you can earn incrementally over a period of, say, 20 years on a well, say you get 100,000 barrels more, and that at $1 a barrel, so that's $100,000 you get. And you can take the same volume of gas and process it or do something else with it and earn $200,000, then it makes sense to utilizing the gas for another purpose. And so this is the debate that's going on now and the studies that we're working on. So there are two different things. And again, we lost the nuance on Norton. He said, oh, the government building the thing, they would lose all of the money because there is no tens of billions of dollars because there's no gas. He has to be a little bit more involved. And I see finally Kaichur News asked him some questions. And I didn't realize he actually said that with such conviction, that he's actually waiting on the general elections to reveal their plans for the oil and gas industry. It's the most bizarre thing that I've ever heard from leader of the opposition. You might not agree with our position, but you know what they are on every issue. So it's the most bizarre. He doesn't have a position on anything. And none of his people, from my reading, I then look at the transcript that came out, and none of them had anything productive to say. They just were shuttling the issue back and forth. So that is an important thing. Again, Kaichur News keep mentioning the issue about that we promised in opposition to renegotiate. I can send you again the clip from before the elections where I said that. I made it clear our position on that matter. But again, that is part of the issue. I think we should look at, I saw this headline again about ExxonMobil raked in 1.3 trillion in profits from Stabroek Block. And so I would look at the, if anyone has that, we should send you the link to their position. And I want you to look at the net cash flow of these companies, because there is another, if you go down to another table right in the same documents that they filed, because I suspect it came from the filing too in a court case. If you go to a table just beyond this table where these numbers are pulled from, you would see a table on net cash position of these bodies. And then you should compare the two. I'm not going to do it today, but let me make it clear that 75%, so your financials are written up differently than the contract. And the contract says 75% goes to cost oil. That is to pay back loans and everything else. Return on investments, every equity, everything else, it goes to pay back that. And of the 25% profit oil that remains, 12.5% comes to the government as profit oil, and 2% change point as royalty. So it's 14.5 the government gets, and ExxonMobil gets 10.5 percentage point of the profit oil. So their share of profit oil in this period is smaller than the government's part. We had already spoken about our disappointment with the lack of ring fencing, because at 75% cost recovery, with ring fencing, they would have already amortized probably some of the earlier investments like the one. So our share would have gone up now, because if you amortize fully, you know 50% of the total revenue, the sale of oil. So the 155,000 barrels a day gets sold, and you're getting 50% of that plus the 2% royalty. So, but because of the lack of ring fencing, although a huge part goes to cost recovery, they utilize a lot of those funds for the aggressive exploration that we have seen. And so that is it. So when you look at the financials, because you can look at accounts from different perspectives, from an accrual basis, a cash flow basis, then you can look at the contract take, all have different meanings. And I would ask people to be a bit more nuanced about it. So that's all I'm going to say about that matter. I see a couple of people. I can't stop without saying something about my dear friend I agree with you. I see one thing that that the local content secretariat, there's a big gap on the oil and gas, that they told us 700 million of business and Exxon said 400 million. Now that's a huge gap. 400 million US dollars of business. 400 million US dollars is still a lot of money for 1 year of business, largely because of the law we passed, the Local Content Act, that drove that sum. And it's 1,500 businesses. That's a lot of Guyanese businesses. So it's still a lot, but that's the Local Content Secretariat gave a different number, and they need to tell us how they came up with that number, because we've been utilizing the number. So that's a real concern that we have. So the last thing I'm going to talk a bit about is well, before I do that, it's for work again. I can't, and without not saying something about it. So he gets, every week he gets a little upset, and my job is to upset him more, because, and so I need to mention his name. So he's ripped off enough Caribbean people. So I see him on an Afro-Caribbean link now, lying to the people. He's starting to rip the Africans off now. So please get in contact with those people, the Africans, and tell them to hold their pockets tight. That this guy, you'd put a big hole in their pocket. He'd pick their pockets. He is an extortionist, a hustler, and tell them to be careful about it. So anybody who has any links to the Africans, tell them this is a con man. On the Press Association, I don't think I should end by not saying anything. So last week, after I spoke, I saw 3 articles. Kite Shores, Stabroek, everybody moralizing out again Jagdeo. Jagdeo criticized the Press Association and everything else. Now, I wonder sometimes if they're really interested in finding out the truth. So I think I just asked a couple of questions. And I asked if the Press Association has been receiving money. Since this is in a private person's, it's a business name. So it's not even a company. It's not incorporated under the Companies Act. It's not incorporated under the Friendly Societies Act. It's a business name owned by Nazima Raghubir. So what do the affiliate bodies, what have they been told globally? And whose account would the Jews go in? Because there has to be an account, and if it's called the Guyana Press Association, but that's owned 100% by Nazima Raghubir, it goes into effectively your Jews go into her account. And if there is any money coming in from abroad, it goes into her account. Now, if it goes into your account, under the laws of the country, you have to submit income tax statements. Your returns have to reflect that. Was this done? If not, it would be illegal. You could be prosecuted for this or fined. Are those not legitimate questions? Or is it because I'm asking them? Why don't? So they obfuscated everything else and then talk about, the length of time it took to hold elections because there was a global pandemic. But you have 220 members. 220 members could all be invited to a dinner party one night and vote again. Look how long the pandemic has been over. And it's a bunch of nonsense. because they have a ton to hide. And making Jagdeo the scapegoat is not going to prevent people asking questions. Making Jagdeo the scapegoat, oh, bad Jagdeo cussing down the press association. These are the same people who moralize about everything under the sun and then rigged the elections, basically rigged the elections that took place. How can they represent anyone? So that's all I'm going to say today. Thank you. Yes, please. Yes.
On your opening statement, I wanted to ask the political opposition that essentially was invited for European ceremony yesterday. And also we spoke about answers in the future. Can you say there was a special input into the matter? And on the eve of the mission, could you give us a progress report of the commitment you made in its manifesto and also what is your specific position related to campaign finance, not necessarily helping small parties?
All right. So on the first issue, I know he was in Madhya. So I don't know whether there was a formal invitation sent, but I don't think formal invitations were sent to anyone. If you're in Madhya and there is this Reed Lane ceremony, then I would think you would want to attend. You don't need to have a formal invitation. At this period when people are grieving, they don't go and they roll out a red carpet and give you a formal invitation and have you seated. You show up. If you really are concerned about people, you just show up. But from what I gather, he chose to go to his party office and wait there. So that's the first issue. I don't think formal invitations were sent to anyone, but I could be wrong on that. That's one. Secondly, this is a matter for the president. But I know, as I said before, the matter has been discussed and the president will speak on this matter at the appropriate time. But people will have, we're committed that all the answers. So far, we know what took place. We know what took place, but much more needs to be done. And people will have the answers. We're committed to ensuring that that happens. On the EU one, yes. So I wasn't clear about that. Yes, but that's why I said, so we are looking at all of these issues and the final solution, which we're committed to do, that would take account of all these variables. The variables, I don't want to repeat them, I mentioned before, about the need to maintain so that people can don't have their businesses or their individual, that individually are attacked because they make up a donation to a party, given what has happened historically. But then ensuring that oil money, particularly, doesn't play a role in our elections. No, but those are the two variables. So within those, making sure that that's it. It could be, I don't want to speculate, but that's our commitment. It was because of that, the worry that big money, right, external money basically, could play a role that we made that promise. It wasn't so much the small donations by Guyanese companies and individuals, it was that commitment. And I think that is also the worry of many because the EU and the others hinted at it.
Okay, sure. I have a question. Just want to think about the there's a lot of thinking there. But production right now, you are missing that. There was a lot of my problem about the sea. It's 6 hours per hour. You know, actually,
so I don't want to be premature, so we are looking at the gas strategy. I told you the timeline immediately after this. So our gas strategy will examine all that we've found so far. We're examining that. The type of gas, what it takes, the economics of getting it out, the market, and then compare that, as I said before, with some of its use in, first of all, verifying that nothing else can replace gas to maintain the reservoir. There are different opinions that water could do this, other things could be pumped into the to maintain the quality of the reservoir. So a lot of those decisions or things are being looked at, so that when the final decision is made, that it would take account of all those variables. And then even like in some areas like Pluma, more gas was found there, less oil. Right across the border in Suriname, they've discovered some gas fields, looking at the possibility of joint development. All of that is part of the study.
But just one follow-up question to this. Is there anything that's used to compensate that or just gas?
It's gas. I think it's just gas. I think it's a gas strategy. Yes, gas. Yeah, I could be wrong, but from all I remember reading it, it's just gas.
Yeah, this is public government.
Yeah, but I'm saying we are trying to maximize the amount of, from the utilization of these resources, maximize its value. To the country. So that is why we are looking. So if the gas could be converted into fertilizer or LNG and exported at the price of LNG maybe a year ago, it was a no-brainer. The world needed it, etc. We have to still examine the economics of it. So what product, what the final in a whole range as to generate more power for other industries, a whole range of use for the gas. You can use it in cosmetics, you can use it in so many other areas.
Yeah, my second question, recently you know the insurance does the case of inflation happen? And the bill goes over how much we offer, and you guys with insurance.
Well, the thing is that if you look at, you're asking me a hypothetical here, and the thing is that if you look at what has happened globally, and I see the figures now, most of the billions of dollars have come out of court cases. They didn't come because the companies voluntarily, even in the US, it's either the pressure and in the UK. So I see figures quoted, but 89 billion and 50 billion. If you look at it, this was Not the cleaning up of the spill, but the compensation. The compensation. And a lot of those didn't emerge because of guarantees. They emerged from court cases. So I expect you would have legislation. Not legislation, but you would have litigation on a lot of these issues. So that is how I anticipate it would be dealt with. But this matter, you will find out much more about it. I saw some people realizing, some people I'm surprised at realizing that whatever guarantee Exxon gives, whatever guarantee, at the end of the day, it comes back to, we will pay for it. They're right about it. I saw a few people writing. These are not companies that are altruistic. They're not in this for the goodwill of mankind. They're here to make money, and it's as simple as that. They come to make money from the country. Our job is to make sure, because on our own, we can put together 30 or 40 billion US dollars. That's 30 billion is 6 times more than all the money in our banking system. And that is, they've invested more than that already there. That's 6 times more money than in our whole banking system here in Guyana. So we needed that to explore these big opportunities. So our job is try to get the investments in, but to get a growing share of the pie too, and to make sure that our people get the possibility of development, the supplies. With our new PSA, we're going to be, when you look at the total take, it will be 60-something% of the total take when you do the analysis of the investments. So that is how I deal with it. Yes. Anyone else? All right, yes. Let me go and then I'll come back to you.
Reference was made to previous fire that happened at the board in 2018 and raised question of why the board at Nadia was not equipped with certain fire prevention mechanism. Does the government have anything to say on this? My next question is about the EU mission. We noted that the EU mission noted that only 226 recommendations were having fully implemented. Granted that some
What to find out?
the EU mission noted that only 2 recommendations are fully implemented.
Yes.
We noted some concerns with some of their recommendations. But can you say if the government has any other challenges with implementing any of the other recommendations?
No, I just explained that they want to deal with the UN Convention, deals again with campaign finance, and that we already have this in our manifesto, if you read the manifesto. And so it is how it's going to be implemented, not in a manner, it was pointed out that even in the developed world, people bypass the legislation. They cheat, what they do, some people make multiple donations. So if you set a limit here, and you say 100,000 Guyana dollars, you could then have 50 people make 100,000, your staff, all of them make $100,000 donation. So we made it clear, our concern when we put that in our manifesto was the influence of external big money, not so much local resources. That is it. But not that we want to create the same amount of money so that the small parties could run a national campaign too, as was written in this article. Oh, they couldn't run a big campaign because only the 2 big parties had money. That's not our fault if we have big parties and we get more donations than they do. Okay, so on that, so that was the only other one there. So, and we have our own position on the matter. I thought they kicked the issue down the road about this voters list. Oh, you must agree, but they should have taken a stand on it, on that matter. But I pointed out here that we went way beyond what the EU even recommended to strengthen our electoral laws. And we're prepared to do all that it takes to do that. The one about state media. I actually have the report of the Chronicle, the EU report. So, the incumbency, they said it was competitively fought. We didn't have any access to state media at that time, but we fought competitively. So I said to them, there is always a benefit to incumbency. You'd always have the ministers go out and the president go out and the publicity. That there is a natural, but we're never going to be as obscene as APNU. We're never going to be as obscene as APNU, and so that was it. I think that they dealt with, but they're more fundamental things. And we are addressing all of those concerns. And I think they understand it, maybe more privately, because they've seen APNU. Two of the persons were here for that period. So they saw APNU in action. So they probably have a more, a better understanding of the nature of the people we're dealing with, the leadership of the PNC that we're dealing with. People who are blatant about stealing the elections and went around the world. I see Nagamoto re-emerging now. He was writing books all the time. But this was the guy who was rubber stamping everything throughout the whole career, the whole period, and then was busy saying the PPP is trying to steal the elections. People forget that. So he re-emerges now, and I'm not going to give him, whenever he re-emerges, then I'm going to deal with him on these matters. That's the first one. On the other issue, I don't think it's time for all the comparisons and everything else. That will come, as I said, all the answers would be given. And that is the speculation I don't want to get involved in, because it's disrespectful to everybody now. If we do that, then you're going to start having, if I start speculating about that, then they would then be able to justify their own speculation. And I don't want to get into that now. But the answers would be evident to everyone.
Can you say if the land acquisition for the gas pipeline route has come?
Yes, I'm told by the Attorney General he has all of the documents where the land has been acquired for the whole route. Did anyone ask the person who tried to stop the pipeline whether she did so because her brother had filed a case a couple of months before that he was not happy with the compensation that he got on the same pipeline, the land? It was the use. What's her name again? Dean, Elizabeth Hughes. And so let me repeat it again, that when civil society play high and mighty, they have to have full disclosure too. So in maybe about February of this year, Mr. Stuart Hughes filed a case in court where he was not happy with the acquisition of the land. He has some land on the pipeline route, and so he's not happy. He has filed that case, it's before the court. A month and a half later, the sister, who is civil society organization, now files another court case to stop the pipeline totally. Somebody needs to, the same way we were asked, they should be asked. Like Nazima Raghubir should be asked some questions too. You know, she should give answers to. You know, not cuss Jagdeo all the time, but give some answers. Similarly, the person who filed this case should be asked, don't you think it's a conflict of interest to do that? How are your interests so aligned? Yes, yes, please. On which what? Oh, the model PSA, yes. Right. Sure. So we're not changing the fiscal terms. We're not changing the fiscal terms. That's it. We're not changing the fiscal terms. So they'd have to live with those terms. Sometimes when they speak, they're so technical. Here, what I try to do too sometimes, if you're scripted and too technical all the time, then you just create more questions than you give answers. And so again, that issue should have been made clear. Yes, on the diesel, we don't have excess gas, because if we had excess gas now, we would have had to flare it, right? So there's no excess gas, meaning it's all, every bit of gas that comes up gets reinjected. So there's no excess to flare. But that's different than the gas to energy project. So some of the gas we reinjected will go to the Wales project. That's all that had to be said. And then we wouldn't have had this big issue, a whole week of writing up and down, APNU giving like press conferences and saying we're wasting all this money.
So while there might be a lot of misconception about what he said, what was clear, he said generally reinjected gas provides the highest value to the resource and the country. And the agreement is for 50 million cubic feet in the first phase, but that they told the government that it's a straight line. What would happen if Exxon is only able to provide that first phase?
Well, Exxon at the beginning said they needed all the gas, every bit of it, and they had to provide the 50 million cubic. So as far as I'm concerned, that pipeline would be fully utilized. So he would have to figure that now. I'm saying it publicly. So we don't share that view, because that's the best value too. We've had different opinions on it. So that's going to be, when we sit down, we'd have to bring the technical people and have a full debate on it. Whether you can do this, you can have alternate use for the gas, that you can maintain the quality of the reservoir without pumping the gas back, and all of that.
So if I'm right,
So you're hearing some, like unlike Norton, you hear some clear positions from me. One, that the pipeline would be fully utilized. Two, that the PSA terms that we put out, the fiscal terms, are the terms that are going to be in the new PSA. You heard clarity on those. That's how we work.
I have a question. Are you generally making a point to the mom version of the small time and everything else? But last week you made some non-written statements, and the following week, the country saw some death penalties. And some persons are being willing to
What?
say that he's willing to swear some people or whatever.
What he is going to do?
Last week Thursday, when he said he sent a message to the government, when it comes to that, if he wants something physical, he's willing to spare persons for that cause.
Yeah.
And then
He's willing to spare,
persons.
oh, for that cause. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, I remember that. He told a minister. He said he told a minister this. Yeah.
And following, you saw the gym. Some persons believe that there's a correlation.
Between the jailbreak and Norton.
Do you have any concerns that there might be a
I don't.
stabilizing?
The thing is that I don't want to speculate. So I do say things about Norton, and I do believe the things I say. It's the fact, Norton has never been in central policy making, ever in his life. So it's very hard when you're an outsider and you operate on the periphery. Look under the Granger government. He couldn't get a job until maybe 2018 when some people begged for him. And he got a job there. I don't know, but he was practically put in an office somewhere and disappeared in an office. And then at the party level, the same thing. It's hard for you to, and sometimes I pity him, to move from that level of ignorance due to lack of exposure to dealing with complex matters of state. And it shows every single day on every statement he makes. So sometimes I believe that he adopts a certain posture and pursues a certain bravado to make himself look more weighty than he actually is. So that's how I dismiss that threat. That it was typical Norton saying, the pugnacious Norton that we know, I'm ready to fight, we're gonna, etc. But then, in this country, you can't say no to anything. So what you have to do, I'm sure in our analysis of what took place, that there are various scenarios. You role play and you do various scenarios. And in one of those scenarios, I'm sure that a political link was explored. It doesn't mean that it is real, but as analysts, particularly in a government, knowing the history of APNU and what happened at Buxton and the close collaboration with the escapees, that would have been one of the scenarios explored by our intelligence operatives. But I'm not accusing him of anything. So I don't want the headline to say I accuse Norton of planning the escape. Yes, please. I didn't.
How much internal mentions have benefited for the part-time job initiative?
So all of them will. Already it's been rolled out in Region 1 and Region 7 Bartica area. So we still have, I think the people have been identified in 9 and 8. So those have to still be rolled out, but they will be over the course of the next few months. So they will be implemented. And this is in addition to the 2,500 CSOs that we have rehired. So at the end of the day, they will probably have, with the CSOs and the part-time workers, close to 4,500 persons. Okay.
Dr. Jagdeo, a lot is being said, and a lot is being said accusations of made by you about opposition members and their actions and accountability and transparency. Have you submitted to the Integrity Commission for the year?
Yes, I submitted my statements to the Integrity Commission, so I'm current. There is the accounting period that would end the end of May, so that means from June on we'd have to submit for the period ending May 31st, 2023. So, but for 2022, yes, I'm current. As I said before, I saw the leader of the opposition mentioning that Jagdeo should match his assets with his income. I've been doing that almost every year. I submit that to my Integrity Commission report. I wonder if he has done that. It would be interesting to ask Norton, has he been submitting? And whether the position he held on the APNO, I don't know what he was. He was some advisor or something like that. I'm finding hard to find his designation. But if he was an advisor, he should have submitted since then. So let us ask Norton if he is submitted from, well, the 3 years they didn't submit anything. And I saw this Annette Ferguson, again, bullying people. Last Thursday, I spoke about her bullying people and in South Georgetown, harassing some of our activists. And before I left the press conference, I walked downstairs in Freedom House and a video surfaced that she was bullying a guy to stay at his place, presumptuous, in the man's place, saying, I'm not leaving. The man said, it's my business place, I'm not leaving, call the police. This is the bullyism, that's the petty thug. And that's why, you know, many people were taken to court. She's gone to the court or sued them. But it was legitimate to question. They questioned my house all my life, how Jagdeo built this house and big house and stuff, and I can show from my integrity reports. Now, they got into office, and in 3 years, the first 3 years, they didn't submit any statements to the Integrity Commission. You look at the accumulation of assets, who built and what in those 3 years. You will see that many of them were offenders. So we need to examine that period, and we are told that 17, Starbuck News had that 17 members of parliament didn't submit. When I asked it to Sheriff, he said all of ours had submitted, so that meant that all the offenders were from APNO again. In and out of government, they are unaccountable.
Dr. Jagdeo, what next? Does the Integrity Commission have the power to follow up on
Yes, last week I said I support the the Integrity Commission in publishing the names of all the defaulters, publishing the names of everyone, because there are many people in government too who have not submitted at different levels. So I don't know who they all are, but if their names are published in the newspapers, and then we can say to them easily, you better do that or else you can't remain in the job. You can't remain in the job if you're refusing. Your name is listed as having to submit these statements, your income and asset, and you're not doing it, then your job is at risk because you're not fulfilling the law in relation to the post you hold. So I would urge the Integrity Commission to post the name of all the defaulters. There are several hundreds of them throughout the country.
Dr. Jagdeo, after Monday morning's incident that has brought most of them in the morning, most of cabinet has branched out and reaching out to victims.
Yeah.
A lot of work is being done to see resolve for these people, helping whatever way you can. The opposition has chosen to highlight what is seen as the publicity of what government is doing. It's not to say government is not always going to publicly do your press conference on Thursday. So the opposition has decided to highlight it. And some members of society to suggest that government is showing they are caring. How do you respond to that?
Well, since the night, when this horrible fire was going on, and I spoke to the Deputy REO, Mr. Britton. People were panicked, and the same night, and we weren't sure where the kids were and everything else. The president, we spoke about midnight, and since then he's practically not rested. And the entire government has been working openly and behind the scenes. You see some images there, but people don't see what has happened behind the scene too. So they see a few pictures maybe on social media and all of that, and they think that's the extent of the work, because this became the number one priority of the government of Guyana, bringing comfort and support to those who were injured and the families of those who tragically died, and also those who were traumatized. That's all. That's the whole government started revolving around one issue. Everything else was forgotten. You know, a lot of these ministers because I'm General Secretary of the party, so they're assigned responsibility in different communities to see the campaigners going on. We pull them off everything. Pull them off all of those. And they're all focused only on this issue. So if you didn't say anything that was going on, if the president didn't announce and the ministers were not personally involved, and they farm it out to their staff, they would say, "How you're callous, you're not doing anything, you don't care." And then when the ministers get involved, then you get the criticism. So you can't win on this issue. No matter what you do, you always have some negative people who thrive. I see some of the vilest things. They thrive on people's grief. They say vile things about the children. The children, they post things about their personal lives, making some of them villains and all of that sort of stuff. This nastiness has to stop. And so that's why I did not answer that question, because I didn't want to get into speculation that was asked of me earlier. So this period is a period for mourning and bringing comfort to all those who lost loved ones or who are struggling for their lives in the hospital now. Those kids are still, many of them are still struggling for their lives. So but as I said, that all the answers will have to come out. We have seen what has happened already. We know what happened, but much more has to be done on this. So this I don't want to get into that sort of thing, but this has been the central issue around which the government has revolved for several days now. And I wish people would see what goes on behind the scenes. For every picture that gets posted on social media, there are 10 other things being done that don't get posted. So that's it.
Can you take opposition leaders' action to use this for political mileage, since there's a number of photos the opposition leader seems to be in Mad at this time, and there are a number of videos and photos coming out, whereas he's getting people to speak up about their issues, unlike the general issue at the time.
Yeah, I seen that just before I came here. I was told he was there. He's stirring up some of his members, like a farmer to show, and a couple of other things. Or children are bathing in the river, or some things like that. No, this is typical. They just, he has to do this. I think it's part of his nature. Wasn't satisfied with just, allowing people to mourn now and that issue. So he had to make the return trip now to stir up trouble. And that's what I heard that he's doing. I don't know if that's the one person he spoke with, because I saw it posted in the cabinet group that what he was doing in there just before I came upstairs. And so but knowing him, this is precisely what they do. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.